You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
There was one time I was staying at a hotel in Madrid, not too far from the airport, and by the time my buddy and I arrived there, it was 11 p.m. I had completely messed up the booking information because I forgot we were losing a day by traveling from California. My buddy and I arrived at the hotel late and tired. Still, we were given our room number, a card, and sent to our room. I noticed that the more turns we made down the hallway, the less lights worked. By the time we reached our room door, it was dark and scary. I didn't want to say anything implying I was feeling uneasy about the room because I was 24 at the time. I had to be tough, and my buddy was 27. Once we opened the door, the room was bright and looked very modern. I felt a whole lot better entering the room. The room was supposed to have 2 full-size beds, but for some reason, they were pushed together to make a giant bed. My buddy and I agreed that it wasn't a big deal, just to stay on our sides of the bed and deal with it tomorrow when we weren't so tired. I slept on the left and he slept on the right. Sometime between 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., when it was very dark in the room, I woke up and saw a man standing in the corner of our room. I knew for sure this man wasn't my friend. My buddy Cody is about 6'2" and 195 pounds. The man standing in the corner looked about 5'10" and 180 pounds. This was the first and only time I ever experienced sleep paralysis. I remember staring at the guy, who appeared to have his back to me, facing the corner of the room closest to me, as if he was counting for a game of hide and seek. I stared at my arm, hanging off the bed to the left, and focused all of my energy and strength to move it, but I could not move. I tried to scream for Cody to wake up, so at least he could know of the man in the room, but nothing came out. I've never panicked so hard in my life, and before I knew it, my eyes closed and I was unconscious again. It wasn't until 7:30 a.m. I woke up and screamed, "Cody!" and hit him. It was as if everything I tried to do during the night suddenly came out at once. He woke up, startled of course, as I came to the realization that everything was okay. The order of everything I'm about to say next is how I knew there was a ghost in that room. I told Cody, "Dude, I just freaked out. It's just that last night..." And before I was able to finish my sentence, Cody said, "Did you see the guy in the corner?" My jaw dropped as he told me he experienced the exact same thing as me the night before. He had sleep paralysis and couldn't move as he stared at the guy in the corner. We had all of our belongings still, and nothing was changed about the room. It still freaks me out to this day how we could never explain what happened that night, or how we were both able to experience the same thing. Cody ended up experiencing another ghost in a hostel we stayed at, but as for me, that was the only ghost experience I had while traveling.
My story takes place in 2018. Picture it, New Orleans during Halloween or Crew Debut season. My parents and I were there to celebrate my father's birthday. I was also attending a healthcare conference to present research. We had decided to stay at the Hotel Monteleone, located in the French Quarter, because that's where my conference was taking place. Little did I know, it's also known for being haunted. As a psychic medium, I was fully prepared to have many paranormal experiences, but I was not prepared for what happened to both of my parents soon after we arrived. On the first night of our arrival, my parents had to stay in my room because their room was double booked. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to find my father sitting up in his bed across from mine. There was a thin, androgynous, 8-foot-tall being touching his leg. I watched for a few minutes. My dad laid back down, and the benevolent being disappeared. The next day I asked my dad about it, and he said he was visited by an alien being who told him he was healing his sciatica pain. Indeed, his pain disappeared for months and months. 4 days later, my parents are now staying in their room. On the last morning of our stay, my father rings me to please come to their room. I get there and I see that they're both anxious and bewildered. My father then proceeds to tell me that he knows my mother was possessed by a spirit the night before, who kept insisting that she jump from the window in her room. My dad stated that around 3 a.m. the night before, my mother woke him up to tell him to hold her hand and to not let her go. My father thought my mother was having a stroke because her face looked faded somehow. She was there but not, he said. His intuition told him to keep guard. My mother recounted that she felt when a young woman had entered her body, but she pushed past her to ask my father to hold her hands until morning came. She said the woman kept asking her to go to the window and jump. My mother said all she could do was pray for protection. She said she focused on my dad and asked the spirit to leave her. We left New Orleans a little shaken, but okay. When we got back home, I reached out to the hotel and spoke to the manager about the incident. He informed me that he'd worked there for 5 years, and I was the third person he spoke to who had this experience. He validated that there was a story that a young woman had jumped to her death from that room after being jilted by a lover. I sure do wish they had disclosed that information prior to me booking that room. Now I know better. I ask before I book.
In May of 2021, I booked a room in the New Orleans Hotel in Eureka Springs. I hadn't really picked up any strange vibes when staying there prior. However, there were a few different instances this time around. The very first night I had fallen asleep, I was awoken by what felt like a human finger poking my toes. I was sleeping alone. The second night, I had fallen asleep and again felt a human finger poking my nose. The third night, I was playing my Nintendo Switch and felt fingers or fingernails running through my hair as it stood straight up as if someone had rubbed a balloon on my head. Whatever it was, it definitely felt feminine. My mother, who was sleeping on the bed as I slept on the couch, had said she felt someone sitting at the end of the bed. However, I was asleep during this time. My mother had sat on the balcony which overlooked part of downtown Eureka Springs one morning and noticed the doorknob jiggling as if someone was twisting it on the other end, yet no one was present. I couldn't really find any stories regarding the hotel being haunted, save for a story regarding a man that was crushed by the elevator. Yet this energy felt feminine. I read a similar story from a guest that complained of the same in the room across the hall, that they felt someone sit on the bed early in the morning.
During the summer of 2009, shortly after graduating high school, my father and I traveled to Estes Park, Colorado. I'd always been fascinated by the paranormal and convinced him to book a room at the infamous Stanley Hotel. Upon arrival, something certainly felt odd about the building. Not necessarily negative, yet a strange tension filled the air. The hotel offers its own ghost tours, where guides recount various reports of encounters with the hotel's many spirits. Jim Carrey had apparently left the hotel in a flustered panic while filming Dumber and Dumber in 1994. Stephen King had of course wandered the halls alone in the late 70s, during the hotel's off-season, which would inspire him to write The Shining. Either that very night or the following night, my father and I decided to perform our own seance of sorts. Nothing could help me anticipate the events that followed. We had first asked, "If there's any spirits in the room, could you please respond by knocking?" This was followed by a knock on the wall. Shortly thereafter, we asked for the spirit to reveal itself, which was followed by a full-bodied apparition emerging in the corner of the room, which appeared to be a male, possibly bearded. I ran out of the room, yet didn't feel threatened. More so, my mind was trying to process what I just witnessed. Years later, my grandmother captured what appears to be F.O. Stanley in the main stairwell near his portrait. I highly encourage enthusiasts and skeptics to either visit the Stanley Hotel or the town of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, the downtown area, if they want a chance to experience something beyond the general realm of normality.
The Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs is yet another hotel I've had odd experiences in, although not as intense as the previous two stories, yet in some ways they were. I had stayed there in 2016 and took the ghost tour. The hotel was at one point a hospital ran by a quack named Norman Baker, who claimed he had the cure for cancer, local spring water mixed with watermelon seeds and other ingredients, which was injected into patients. People inflicted with cancer rushed to the hospital, while Norman Baker would write letters on their behalf, asking the family for more money, stating their condition had improved. There was an area in the basement that was once used as the morgue. Prior to COVID, guests were locked in the basement. Upon panning around with my phone camera, I noticed what seemed like 40 to 50 orbs in this room, yet only got one or two in photos. During a tour of the Basin Park Hotel, we downloaded an app which was supposed to be a spirit box. I had written the app off as a hoax after seeing nothing but nonsense come through on the screen. Upon arriving home, I asked the spirit box if any victims of the Crescent were present. The meter immediately began to pick up and continued to beep at a rapid rate, answering my question, "Were you abused at the Crescent Hotel by Dr. Baker?" To which the box replied, "Always." And I told them what an injustice it was that such horrid events occurred with such little consequence to the Dr. Baker, and that I was sorry this happened. My room grew to be very cold. This was mid-spring, and it was at least 75 degrees outside. Then the box said, "Scared," followed with, "Going home." My room returned to normal temperature, and the spirit box began to operate normally.
The following happened when I was on a school French history trip to France and Belgium back in 2014, which incidentally was the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. However, the paranormal events which occurred in this short trip had nothing to do with the many mass grave sites and historical locations we visited. In fact, they all occurred in the first basic and cheap hotel that we stayed in for the first 2 nights. The hotel, which I've since forgotten the name of, was bordering on a hostel. It was 6 of us to a room, 3 bunk beds, and I was sharing with one of my closest friends. I also knew the other boys fairly well. I remember that on the first day we had been awake for well over 24 hours, so upon arriving at the hotel, we didn't pay much attention to how it looked. However, we found it surprisingly hard to get to sleep immediately. The first strange occurrence happened while everyone was casually chatting as we lay in bed, probably around 11 at night. Each bottom bunk had a light underneath it, and they were all controlled with one central wall switch by the door. I should mention that we had all of these lights off, as we were meant to be asleep. However, in the middle of our conversation, one of the lights suddenly turns on. It stopped our conversation dead, and we were all silently confused. This happened several more times, with lights going on and off under the bunks, while the wall switch didn't move. Everyone was getting visibly spooked at this point. However, one of the boys had found a second switch beside his bed, and we soon realized that every bunk had these controls for these lights. With everyone relaxed again, our 14-year-old imaginations calmed down significantly, and everyone began to nod off, one by one. Later in the night, at what I estimate was about 1 a.m, I was still half awake. I've always been a very light sleeper. I was listening to the deep breathing of everyone in the room when I heard an audible click. I turned around and saw that the light to the walk-in shower was on. I assumed that someone had walked in to play a prank. But after quickly scanning my eyes about the room, I could see that everyone was in bed. I was confused, but not frightened, yet. Shortly after, the shower turned on seemingly by itself, and I again turned over to face the walk-in shower. Sure enough, through the crack in the door, I could see the shower water running. I turned away quickly and lay there for hours, unnerved, before falling asleep. The next morning was busy, visiting several historical sites, and it wasn't until lunchtime in the cafe that a few of us brought up the night before. Several others testified to being awake when the light and shower turned on. We were all slightly unnerved, but it wasn't until the next night that things really kicked off. On the second night, everyone fell asleep very quickly, but as per usual, I could not sleep. I lay awake slightly nervous, and the main light of the room went on and off at intervals of around 10 minutes or around an hour. Then, at around 2 a.m, I heard a huge crash, and I looked around to see that the shower door had swung open completely, hitting the wall. The light was on, and the shower was running. I was terrified. I turned to face the wall and didn't open my eyes until the next morning. The next day, we moved to a different hotel, and the subject of the hotel being haunted was only brought up once more during the trip. Although this is one of the smaller experiences I've had regarding the paranormal, it sticks with me due to how unexpected it was. We found out that the original owner of the hotel had died from cancer, but I saw no evidence or reason that whatever caused the disturbance was her ghost or spirit. It is an experience that will always stick with me as being strange and spooky.
I work at a Hampton Inn and Suites, and I've always had paranormal experiences throughout my life, but I recently started working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m, doing audit at the hotel. I'm by myself and things seem to be more active on this shift. I've spoken to other employees and they've noticed weird things happening, and a few have even seen figures. They've told me about elevators opening and closing without anyone in them, things falling over from across the room, movement sensor lights going off in locked rooms that no one has access to, things like that. Innocent things, and I didn't think much of it. I noticed things like that on my 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift when I first started working, but kind of brushed it off. I was the only one on the shift, but there was a constant flow of people in and out of the lobby, so I was around people a lot. My first night working 10 to 6 was with someone, so he could train me. The radios got staticky and loud at around 2:30 to 3 a.m. He said we just have to turn them off because they do that sometimes. So the next day I came in and made sure to turn off all the radios when I got there, so I wouldn't have to hear it. 2:30 to 3 a.m. rolled around and the radios started making their sound again. You can understand my confusion and fear. I made sure they were all off. The motion light in the PBX room turned on. It's pretty much a big room full of computers, and it controls all of the Wi-Fi and systems the computers run on. I'm the only one on shift and no one else is allowed in the back. I walk back there. No one. I shrug it off and head to the kitchen. It's about 3:30 at this point, and again, the motion light turns on in the pantry. The door was closed, but I could see the light turn on from the crack underneath the door. Things like this happen a lot now, but it freaks me out the most when I'll be walking around and feel someone tug on my ponytail or lanyard. Again, I'm the only one on shift and no one else is around. I'll be walking so there's nowhere for it to snag on. We also have plexiglass dividers to separate us from the guests, and I can see my reflection in them. I tend to see movement behind me in the glass sometimes. A wall is behind me, so no one is walking behind me without me noticing. It freaks me out, but I don't think it's out to hurt me. I don't know what entity is at this hotel, but it seems to be much more playful than the others I've encountered. Tonight, I heard something fall over when I was walking in the back office. The top to a large hand sanitizer bottle was taken off and laying on the floor, with the bottle laying spilled on the counter. This is just a short list of things that happen on my shifts. I'm getting used to it, but it still freaks me out. This story I'm about to tell is about a hotel in Kuala Lumpur. It's pretty famous, and if you know hotels well enough, it's one of the more popular ones, which comes with a kitchen and a huge bathroom in the Golden Triangle, with a pretty huge forest reserve right next to it. After finishing my work at about 1 a.m, I decided to call it a night. I turned off my laptop, made sure my iPad was in sleep mode, and crawled into bed. At about 3 a.m, I woke up to my phone lighting up, like I was getting a phone call or alarm ringing. I took it, but there was nothing. Feeling it was just an isolated incident, I placed the phone down next to my bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the screen on the iPad begin to power on and off a few times, not just once. This was strange, as it was always off. At this point, I sat up at the corner of the bed, but directly ahead of me, I notice the TV is doing the same thing. The lights are coming on and off in no specific order. At this point, I'm a bit freaked out, so I turned on all the lights with the master switch, and everything is back to normal. After about 5 minutes or so, I got back under my blankets and turned the lights off. My windows are facing the forest, and I could see the shadows of the trees right in front of me. The curtains were slightly open, and I got the strange but very real sensation that I was being watched. It was seriously overwhelming. I sunk lower into my bed. What happened next, I have no explanation for, but it was terrifying. I began to hear knocking and thumping noises on the window, and then screeching noises began to appear. Imagine someone dragging their fingernails down a wall. That's what it sounded like. Knowing I'm staying at a decently high level, with no balcony and no tree branches within 20 feet of the windows, this was not a natural sound, and I was praying like mad, begging for the sound to go away. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep that night, but I did. I experienced one pretty spooky incident once. My work requires me to travel a lot to most countries in Asia. Most of the hotels I stayed in are the usual 4-star business hotels. from the newer boutique types, while others range from older and aging hotels from the 80s to rundown digs in rural provinces. When I traveled to Jakarta, I would stay in this old business hotel outside the city. I've stayed here several times and had no issues. No late night knock on the door as warned by my host there. But during my last trip, I was pretty spooked. This is one of those hotels with the old-fashioned elaborate console that controls the lights, has a radio, etc. So the first few nights I switched off the bedside lamp using the console. One night, after an hour or so, the light suddenly came on. I switched it off and went back to sleep. Then, it came on again. It happened a third time and by now I was spooked. In the end, I unscrewed the bulb. On the last day, on the way to the airport, my host there pointed out an abandoned building downtown and said that it was so because it was haunted by a Pontiac. Apparently, a security guard saw it in the toilet and went insane. Naturally, I was reminded of my episode with the lamp. It was later that I found out that Indonesia has some of the most haunted buildings in the world.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.